Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be the mid-year book freakout tag. I know it's a little bit on the later side, but to be fair, a lot of y'all were posting yours at like the beginning of June and I wanted to have a couple more weeks of reading stats to include in this mid-year book freakout challenge. So I'm really excited to talk about these books. I know I've said in a couple of other videos that I felt like this was not the best reading year for me, but as I was sitting down figuring out my answers to these tag questions, I realized that I have read some really good books this year, so let's go ahead and talk about them. The first prompt of this tag is, what is the best book that you've read in 2024? And I love when I read that question and a book immediately comes to my mind, and that is Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. This is by far my favorite book, the best book that I have read this year. I went into this one with really high expectations. Nestlings was marketed as Salem's Lot meets Rosemary's Baby, and those are two of my favorite horror classics, so I had high hopes for this one, and I love when I read an anticipated book and it absolutely delivers. This book, I talked about it at length in a reading vlog earlier this year, but just this is a book where I read it and I'm like, this is why I love horror. I absolutely loved this story. We're following a young couple in New York and they win a housing lottery, so they and their young daughter move into this beautiful apartment building that they would not have been able to afford otherwise, and this seems too good to be true, and it absolutely is, because there's something going on with their neighbors and with the rest of this apartment building. The comp titles for this one are spot on. If you like Rosemary's Baby, if you like Salem's Lot, you're going to want to pick this up. You're absolutely going to devour it. This has really cemented Nat Cassidy as one of my favorite horror authors. He's only come out, well, I think he's come out with more than two things, but the two books that I've read by him, Mary and Nestlings, have both been glowing 5 stars. Like, this has been like the easiest 5-star that I've given this year, and I absolutely love it. If you like vampires, in particular, if you want like a different take on vampires that I feel like we don't normally get in media, then I would recommend that you check this out. This pulls on the heartstrings. It also has some really chilling and creepy moments. I could talk about this book all day. I absolutely love it. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. The next question is, what is the best sequel that you've read in 2024? And I'm actually going with the short story for this one. This is In You Like It Darker by Stephen King. This is a collection of short stories that came out this year. Rattlesnakes is one of the short stories in this collection, and it is the sequel to Cujo. Now, I did not think that Cujo needed a sequel. I was never anticipating one. When I found out that there was going to be a short story in this collection that was a sequel to Cujo, I was intrigued, but I didn't really know what that meant. But I read it, I loved it. It was one of the stronger stories in this collection, and I don't want to give too much away because again, it's a sequel to Cujo, but it was really well done. Surprisingly, like, very heartfelt. This is another one where it has moments that pull on your heartstrings and then also some very, very unsettling moments. Rattlesnakes is a scary, scary story. The imagery of some of the things that happen in the short story are absolutely chilling, and I just thought this was such a good story. Again, like I mentioned, I didn't think Cujo needed a sequel. I honestly felt the same about The Shining and Dr. Sleep before I read Dr. Sleep and loved it. I think King does a really good job of creating these unexpected sequels, and I definitely think that he doesn't write a sequel unless he actually has something to say when it comes to his books like The Shining or Cujo. I thought Rattlesnakes was just a wonderful addition to not only the short story collection, but also just like the story of Cujo as a whole. The next prompt is, what are some new releases that you have not gotten to this year but you want to? Just off the top of my head, and the ones that I actually have on my physical TBR in terms of 2024 releases, I'm really excited to read the newest Craig DeLuey, How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. One of the themes for this year I have noticed have been books about horror movies or horror movie productions, just like cursed objects, cursed film. I love that subgenre of horror, so I'm really looking forward to reading this one. And then I also have the newest Josh Malerman, Incidents Around the House. This is, I think, like a haunting, I don't know, creepy little kid horror, I believe, but this is another new release that I really want to get to. The next prompt question are, what are some of your most anticipated books for the second half of 2024? The first one would have to be An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. This is a dark academia horror. I have read the other 2 books by Alexis Henderson, really enjoyed them, Year of the Witching and House of Hunger. I really loved House of Hunger. longer, so if my reading journey continues the same way, then they just keep getting better and better for me. I love a good dark academia. I believe this is also like a magical school dark academia. I don't know, but this author has a great track record for me. It's a beautiful cover and it's a really cool concept that I love in horror. So I'm excited for that one. I believe it comes out in October, if not October, definitely the latter half of this year. And then the other release that I'm looking forward to is Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wong, and this one has actually already been published, but this one is getting like the traditional publication treatment. So it is already out and self-published, so you guys may have read this one before, but I have not. But I'm really looking forward to checking this one out. This was one I was trying to get to when it was self-published, and then I'm just so happy and excited for this author that it is going to be traditionally published, in particular because an audiobook is coming out alongside the new physical book. As someone who does love reading both physically and via audio, I love indie books, but it is really exciting because it is a lot more common with traditionally published books to have an audiobook. So I'm really excited for that. I'm excited for this book to get a larger audience. Books with Emily Fox has been raving about this one, and this one is actually also a dark academia setting, like a magical school. This one is more fantasy, the other one was more horror. I believe that Books with Emily Fox said that this one is for fans of Babel, and I love Babel, the Dark Academia book by R.F. Kuang. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. I've already heard wonderful things. I've never read anything from the author, but the cover is gorgeous and I'm really excited to check it out. The next prompt is, what book is the biggest disappointment so far? And I hate that I have to say this one, but The Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake, without a doubt, my biggest disappointment of the year. Now, I do want to point out, this is by no means the worst book that I have read this year. I have like a number of books that I have enjoyed less or rated lower than this book, but just purely based on the prompt, which is biggest disappointment, this one absolutely takes the cake. The Atlas 6 is one of my favorite books. I still consider it one of my favorite books. It's a character-driven magical dark academia story, and I thought it was going to be the start to a really wonderful series. Even though I love the Atlas 6, it's not going to be one of my favorite series of all time just because of how the ending happened. And it's not even what happened in the ending, even though there are some like heartbreaking things that happen in this book. It's not what happened, it's the way that this book was written. This book just felt very different in tone. Like the writing style felt very different than the previous two books in the series, and it just was so far removed from the things that I liked about the Atlas 6. The Atlas 6 was a magical dark academia. Our main characters were focusing on learning magic and studying and pursuing knowledge, and by this book in the series, it's just a completely different prompt, and I just felt like a lot of the main characters had changed a lot, which with the things that they had to go through, of course they would change, but it was a really hard read, just in particular because of the way that things happened and the writing style, and just this felt like in a lot of ways like first draft, and I didn't love it. I didn't love it, and it's heartbreaking to say, but this is my biggest disappointment. On the flip side, the next prompt is, what's the biggest surprise? And that would have to be Hyde by Kirsten White. Now, this one, I don't think I have seen a single person give this a positive review. Whenever I see it in a booktube wrap up, or even really on Instagram, people say that they don't love it, that they were disappointed, that they were let down, that they didn't like the story. So I was really pleasantly surprised when I picked this up and had a really fun time with it. There will be a lot more thoughts about this one and actually another book that I talk about in an upcoming vlog, so I don't have too much more to say about that, other than I believe that this one, I went into it with the lowest expectations out of any book that I've read this year, because I just don't hear anyone saying great things about it, but I had a fun time. I really don't get the hate for this one. I thought it was fun, fast-paced, and it delivers on exactly what the Dust Jacket promises in terms of story, so I had a lot of fun with this one. I really like Kirsten White's writing, and I'm really surprised that this one gets, or at least tends to, from what I've seen, get a lot more negative reviews than positive ones. The next prompt is, what is your favorite new author? Either a debut author or a new to you author. I actually have two. I was looking at my Storygraph stats, and I have two authors that I had never read from before 2024, but in 2024 I have read multiple of their books and really enjoyed all of them. So that would be Chuck Wendig and Darcy Coates. Both of these authors write in the horror genre. Chuck Wendig has, like, I hate to say this because I think that this gets used way too often in the horror genre, but he really has a Stephen King vibe about his books. And when I mean that, like, he writes, like, both the books that I've read, The Book of Accidents and Black River Orchard, have been very, very chunky, and we follow like a lot of different characters, and just the narration style and the scope of the horror and just the like way that it's written with like the pop culture references and how it's very set in a specific town, and you feel like the whole entire town is kind of a character for especially Black River Orchard. It feels very Stephen King-y to me, so I'm excited to check out his next horror release. And then Darcy Coates writes like really fun but also creepy. Actually, I think I read one of hers at like the very tail end of last year. I think I read a Darcy Coates in December, so scratch that, but I've read several this year. A lot of people call her a cozy horror author. I definitely think some of her titles fit more into cozy horror than others. I actually think a lot of what I've read I wouldn't necessarily classify as cozy horror, but I think most of her haunted house horror, like the haunted house stories, the ones that all are like the haunting of blank house, those could fit into cozy horror because she tends to have more positive, uplifting endings, and I do think that it's a great introduction for the horror genre if you're looking to get into adult horror. So both Chuck Wendig and Darcy Coates, I think they're really killing it in the horror genre, and they both have very extensive backlists that I'm really excited to dive into. The next prompt is, who is your newest favorite character? I'm gonna have to go with Jade Daniels from My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I am not gonna talk too much about this because this review is coming up in an upcoming vlog, but I love reading about Jade. She is such a wonderful protagonist, and she is just such a realistic protagonist. She really feels like a real life person who you could meet. The way that this was written really gives you so much insight into Jade's character. I just think she's such a wonderfully flawed and complex character. I'm so excited to follow her throughout this series. She's just so realistic. There's no better word for it. My camera overheated in the middle of that, but yeah, Jade Daniels is awesome. She's such a unique character, and I can definitely say that I have never read another main character like her before. As a big character-driven reader, I just think that this is something that Stephen Graham Jones excels in general, and in particular in this series with Jade Daniels. The next prompt is, what is a book that made you cry? And this really cements the fact that I need to be focusing more on short story collections, because they're never something I gravitate towards, but somehow, even though like I think I have this notion that I don't like short stories as much as long form fiction, both of my answers for this question are short stories. So the first one, we're going back to this collection, You Like It Darker. I just think in general this is a very strong short story collection, and Stephen King is at his best, but The Answer Man in particular, The Answer Man, and then just like it's the last short story in this collection, so that, and then going immediately into the acknowledgements and the author's notes, it got me. I cried. I don't cry at a lot. I read a lot of really dark things, but this just really got to me. The Answer Man was beautiful, and the acknowledgements also just kind of like reflecting it, and Stephen King kind of reflecting on his life, and just even the journey of how he wrote The Answer Man. In part, he wrote it at the very beginning of his career, shelved it, and then brought it back out and rewrote it and reworked on it for this collection. It gets at my heart. It's such a good short story. I'll probably, honestly, I could see myself rereading this entire collection this year. That's how much I loved it. The other short story, I didn't like cry, but like I teared up, and this collection as a whole I don't think is as strong as the Stephen King collection, but Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, The Husband Stitch. Now, The Answer Man was the last short story in Stephen King's collection. The Husband Stitch is the first short story in this collection. If you read this, for most of it, you're like, why would you cry at this? Why would you tear up at this? Yeah, it's good writing, but why? But there's a very specific line at the end of this that just really sums up what this story is about and what this collection is about, and just it's such a powerful line that I was dumbstruck by it, and it really got to me. So The Husband Stitch also was very powerful, and has really cemented that I've been reading a lot of killer short short fiction this year. The next prompt is, what is a book that has made you happy? And that's Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. I loved this one and I wanted to work it into this tag somewhere because I just loved it. I loved it. I listened to the audiobook. I actually really believe that you should listen to this via audiobook. It's excellently produced, and just I think because the story like features so much about a horror movie, and just getting those extra audio elements really helps tell this story. But this story the whole time, first of all, this is scary. So not only did this book make me happy because it's a great horror book, I think it's one of the author's best, but also as I was listening to it, it's one of those books where I'm like, wow, this is why I like horror. I love books where I'm reading them and I'm not only being like, wow, this is why I love horror books, but wow, this is why I like horror movies, and just being a part of like the horror fandom just in general. It's just, this book made me really, really happy. It made me want to go and watch a horror movie and dissect it and talk about it with my friends. I loved this one. This one brought me a lot of joy just listening to it and reading it. I enjoyed the reading experience, and I also just really enjoyed like the appreciation that this reminded me of how much that I love horror. The next prompt is, what is the most beautiful book that you've bought or read this year? And that for me, without a doubt, is going to be the Bone Season re-releases by Samantha Shannon. This is one of my favorite series, and I am so happy that they are getting like a revamp so that the series can have cohesive covers, and not just cohesive covers, but covers that are just so gorgeous and really, I think, represent the series and what it's about more. So I love this one. I love this one. I'll also throw up a graphic because the first 4 books got like the redesigned cover treatment, and I just think they're gorgeous. I love an illustrated cover with a lot of Easter eggs, and if you've read the Bone Season series, then you know that locations and flowers all have a lot of meaning to this series. It's definitely making me crave a reread because I have read this whole entire series. It's one of my favorite. I have not actually read any of the revised versions yet, so I think I'm gonna have to do that later on this year, is dive back into this series. The 5th book comes out in January, and I'm in love. I'm in love with the cover. I think the new covers are just so gorgeous, and not only are they gorgeous, but they represent the series really well. So yeah, I'm in love. And that brings us to our final prompt in this tag, and that is, what books do you still need to read by the end of the year? And usually I'm just like, all of the books. I have so many books on my TBR, but in particular, I'm gonna have a little audience interaction for this one because I have not read a single 5-star fantasy this year. I mean, I have read some 5-star fantasy, but they have been rereads. And while those have been great reading experiences, and obviously a 5-star is a 5-star, and some of the rereads that I read were some of my favorite books, like I knew going into them that they'd be a 5-star. I want a new release fantasy that's going to be a 5-star. I haven't found any, even though I have read some good fantasy this year. I've also read some really, really disappointing 2024 fantasy releases, so I need your help. If you're watching this, if you have read a 5-star fantasy this year, leave it down below. If you guys could help me with that, that would be great, because when I was putting together like a tentative list of the best books of the year so far, none of them have been fantasy, because when I make those lists, I don't count rereads. And normally my best books of the year tend to be like either 50-50 fantasy or horror, or if it's less of a 50-50 split, it's usually more fantasy, and I just don't think that's the case this year. So if you've read some awesome fantasy this year, let me know down below so I can check it out. And that is going to be it for this book tag. I have a really fun time like cataloging my reading every year and checking in and seeing what kind of books and what reading experiences that I've had throughout the year. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel for all of the cozy gaming, bookish, and horror content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!